Hey guys, welcome back to the lab. Today at the bench we'll be reattaching the original boards to this 1890s oversized family Bible, and we'll also be installing the replacement spine material, so by the time we're finished, this book will actually look like a book again. So I start by taking the book out of the benchtop press with my bar clamp because it's hard to get it in and out of this press with one hand while maintaining the curvature of the spine. And in case any of you are curious, that is a machinist press, not an actual bookbinder's press. I prefer it over the lying press that bookbinders use because it's much heavier and doesn't slide around. So I start by fitting this linen material, and what I do is I use my dividers to measure because I've only lifted so much leather on this board, and the linen needs to comfortably fit up under it. And once this linen is all gluey and damp, it won't come out very easily, and so I like to measure twice and cut once. And now I'm going to cut the piece of plastic that I'm going to insert up under the leather. I'm going to cut it to length, because it doesn't need to go up under the turn-ins of this book. So now I'm just going to trim the linen with my Olfa and remove any strings. And then I'm going to come in and clip the corners off. These aren't really structural. They don't really provide that much support or strength. And they tend to get folded up over on themselves or like balled up under the leather. And so I just like to remove them to prevent that. So I realized when looking at this back board of the book that I haven't dealt with the little tiny scrap of fabric that lies in the joint inside this book. And it's popped loose and I need to put it back in place so that I have an accurate kind of width that includes this. It's only a couple millimeters, but that makes a huge difference. And putting it back in place will give me the appropriate spacing I need, because if I don't have it in place, I run the risk of the joint being too tight on this book and the linen being stretched too far, and that can put all kinds of weird strains and pressures on this book. And I just want it to sit how it's going to sit on the shelf with none of those tensions. And so I'm just going to lay this back in place with a little PVA. And this fabric material in the joint between the paste down and the end sheet is in surprisingly good shape. Just in case you are not a lover of slow book repair cinema, this is a reminder. You can go down to the gear icon in the lower right of your window and change the speed to 2x if you want to watch this video in about 13 minutes instead of 27 minutes. If you're here with me for the whole thing, that's great too, but this is a really long video this week. And then I repeat this with the front cover of the book. And what I'm doing here is I am pulling this material loose because it was still adhered in a few places ever so slightly. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to glue around those original places where it's still intact, because I have a kind of a gut feeling that the original glue on these will pop loose at some point, and I don't want it to pop loose and then have the surrounding PVA still be intact, because that could cause kind of loose spots on the inside of the joint, and I'd prefer just kind of a uniform look and uniform attachment. And this is the, as I said, the front cover. So there is the inscription, the nice inscription on the inside of the, or on the end sheet of this book. Okay, so I've let those sit for a few minutes and they have dried. And so I am going to come in with this piece of plastic that is my release layer up under the leather of these boards. And I like to use my micro spatula to create a little gap up under the leather. It gives me some room to slide this plastic piece up under, which is still tedious. It's still a pain, but the outcome is better at the end of the day. So I like to use the plastic here. So I weight the plastic to make sure it doesn't come out and all my hard work is not undone immediately when I apply this PVA. So I come in with the PVA on the linen, and I'm not shy. If there's PVA on the plastic, it just provides a little bit of slip for the linen to slide up under this leather. What I don't want, however, is for a bunch of PVA to slide down in the crack of the joint itself between the board and the shoulder of this book, because that will cause, when I open the book the first time and turn that in page, it will mean there's like adhesive well beyond where I need there to be adhesive in the gutter on the inside of this book. And so I am avoiding that, but a little PVA on the plastic is not a big deal. All right, so now I come in with my micro spatula and just slide that linen up under the plastic. And then this back cover is slightly warped. And so I want to come in with this tool, which I use as a micro spatula. On the other side, it's got like a flat end, but this end is has a little, it's like a blunt hook. And I think this tool is actually for working in clay and sculpting clay. But I really like it for this aspect. It just kind of grabs the linen and tucks it back up under. So I take my time and make sure the linen is like fits well and there's no gapping. And I apparently missed a spot of PVA at the tail of the book. And so I'm going back in with a little extra adhesive. And then I come in with my Teflon folder and make sure I have great contact. Clean off the extra adhesive from the plastic with a cotton ball. And then weight the linen up under the leather and wait for a few hours and come back. So I make sure I haven't gotten a bunch of PVA down in that joint, make sure everything opens and closes. And then I flip the book over to work on the front cover side. And again, I check my depth and I check for any impediments that might be up under this leather that would keep me from just sliding the linen where it needs to go. And then use dividers off the edge of the board to mark this depth. And then try to trim, but I needed a fresh break-off blade on my Alpha and didn't realize it. So you'll see me struggle a little bit here. Fortunately, it's not a big deal. And then I will clean up my linen strings from my dull blade. And nick my corners to prevent bunching or folding. And now it's time to insert that plastic up under the leather. And the only downside or thing I have to watch out for when using the micro spatula this way is that I do not bring either of my hands down onto the micro spatula because it will break the leather. And I really, really don't want to do that. But I think it's kind of a nifty trick that works really well for me. So I do it, but I'm still mindful and careful when I do. And now it's PVA time on this linen. And so now I'm just going to use that oversized micro spatula or the larger micro spatula to just kind of wiggle this linen up under that plastic. I'm sorry for the camera wiggle. It's attached to the bench. I have rigged a different setup for the next book, so thank you for enduring the motion sickness. And I'm checking for lumps and bumps when I run my fingers over the leather to make sure there's nothing weird, nothing bunched up. And then I decide I need a little extra space with the plastic spacer at the head of the book. So I put a little scrap piece of plastic up there to ensure I have good separation. And so I come back in with my hook. Sometimes I don't need the hook. Sometimes I feel like I need the hook if that linen is a little loose in the gutter. And sometimes I feel like the thick board Bibles, the double thickness binder's board, for whatever reason, creates a little more space or gapping. I'm not sure, but the linen looks loose. And so I'll come in and be a little finicky with the hook to make sure I have like the perfect amount of material, like overlapping the joint onto the board. Okay, so I let that dry and I come back the next day and take the weight off. And now it is time to get that tone long fiber paper replacement spine piece in place. So I make sure the boards went on with no problem, nothing weird, nothing creaky, nothing's too tight. And you'll notice in the last episode, I folded the turn-ins for this replacement spine piece, like I fit them using the boards, and then I came back a couple of days later, maybe a day later, and I was like, oh, that's too tall. So I just pulled it loose, and you can see I'm readhering it at the correct height for the book. All right, so now I'm going to use my bar clamp again to hold this book in the correct position while I fit it back into this like machinist press. All right, and it's time to apply PVA to the spine after I fit this spine piece one last time and make sure it is the correct height. I'm not paranoid or anything. All right, so PVA goes on this hollow tube structure, and what this hollow tube allows me to do is it allows me to reuse the original spine piece without making that leather spine piece like make contact directly with the back of the spine. So when this book is open and closed in the future, if the leather spine piece is glued directly to the back of the spine with no hollowness, no gap, no separation, it will crack at several places, most likely, unless the family only opens the book to a couple different places. And the spine leather will crack. The finished leather on the exterior will fall off faster, and ultimately that spine piece will be destroyed even faster than it would just by normal degradation and use if I don't use this hollow tube construction on this book. So as you can see, I'm taking my time fitting the long fiber paper spine piece because if it is crooked, it's really obvious. And so I just take an extra minute and make sure everything is where it should be before I press it into place with my Teflon folder. And I make sure to get good coverage across the spine, shoulder to shoulder, with no wrinkles or bubbles up under this material. So I check each edge and make sure everything is laid all the way down. And then I let this part dry overnight, and so I come back the next day and take it out of the press using the bar clamp. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit this long fiber paper up under the plastic piece, but on top of the linen. And so I'm just going to slide the micro spatula in and loosen any adhesion between the plastic and the linen from that PVA. If any, it just pops right loose, so it's not a big deal. So again, I come in with my dividers and get my width that the paper needs to be. And then I trim it out. So then I come in with tiny scissors and I cut the turn-ins at the joint, but I don't cut them all the way, if that makes sense. I leave the fold, but I need a little bit of room in order to slide the material up under the leather on this side and then under the turn-ins at the head and tail, if that makes any sense. If I left it solid, it's pretty difficult to do. And so the majority of the kind of structure of this joint or the stability or the strength comes from the linen. And I consider this paper, while it is very strong and hard to tear, I consider this to be more kind of aesthetic or cosmetic versus structural. And so I think cutting it is fine and works well for what I need it to do. So now I come back in with PVA again. And sometimes you'll see me like roll my fingers or my hands together, and that's just me rolling the PVA off. So if you've ever gotten Elmer's glue on your fingers, it's kind of a similar feeling when it dries. So I just like to remove it that way so I can feel what I'm doing, and also if it's damp so I don't get PVA all over everything I'm touching, places I don't really want PVA to be. And even though I have carefully measured and cut this long fiber paper, it is still too wide right at the turn ends. And so I'm going to pull some out and trim it off and then slip it back under. And as you can see, this paper, I love it. It has great wet strength, and so it's not a big deal to do that. Ideally, I would avoid doing that, but it's not really a big deal. I just don't want to do it the entire length of this paper. And I don't know why the turn-ins wound up being more shallow than the rest of the lifted leather, but they did, so surprise. And I'm checking the length of the board to make sure that there's no long fiber paper folded up under. Just the two turn-in areas were kind of a surprise. So I use a cotton ball to remove the excess adhesive from the underside of this piece of plastic. And I think I was going to avoid glue spots on the new long fiber paper material, and then I just decided to remove the whole thing. So I got a feeling on this book it would be pretty straightforward to come back in and glue this leather down without having certain areas stuck and not stuck. I just had a feeling that the plastic did a really good job protecting the leather from adhesive, and there wasn't like a ton of excess adhesive like squirting out. It didn't feel weird. It just felt like really well adhered. And so I felt comfortable removing the plastic at this point. So as you can see, I, for lack of a better word, have kind of crunched up the long fiber tissue on the bottom of this book where it touches my cutting mat. And that's not ideal, but it's also not a big deal because this material is really forgiving. And as you'll see in a minute, when I wet it out with paste, all the wrinkles just come right out of it. So I really, as I've said before, love this paper. All right, so I am going to, again, measure and cut this tone material so it fits up under the leather. Spoiler, I'm actually successful this time with my measuring and cutting. And I'm going to nick my turn-ins so everything can fit together. And loosen the plastic if it's adhered anywhere. And then apply the PVA to the paper. And then I'm going to use my micro spatula and work this paper up under the leather and up under the plastic, but on top of the linen. And I've got a couple spots I'm suspicious of. They don't look like they're laying as far up under the leather as they should be. And so I bring that hook in and kind of tug on them a little bit. So I've got that laid up under there, and then I'll press it with a Teflon folder to make sure I have good contact. All right, so in the next episode, we will lay down the cover leather that we tucked everything up under today. We will prep and readhere the original spine leather, which gives me a surprisingly hard time. And then we will compare the before and after of this book. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to catch every episode and to show the lab some love. Thanks.